I think we're good. All right, everyone, welcome to our weekly startup discussion tips and advice. Today we have Thomas joining us, and Thomas Hung, and we're just going to dive into just conversations surrounding raising, fundraising, pitching, and just the entire ecosystem as far as the startup world is looking right now, and having access to investors and so forth. So, Thomas, it's a pleasure to have you on here. We're looking forward to diving in here and just picking your brain on a host of questions. So, Thomas, let's just start off with just your experience in the startup space and things that you've come across. What's gotten you to this position you're currently at, and then we could just transition from there. Is that fine?
Sure. Okay, so let me share a little bit about my background. So I'm a serial entrepreneur. Uh, Earlier, I was in engineering roles. I was engineering manager, engineering director for computer companies that included IBM, Memorex, National Semi, and a small startup called Apple. Worked with a young kid named Steve Jobs. Then I became a serial entrepreneur, and I was the CEO and founder of four computer product companies. And so I started those companies with myself and a couple of co-founders, and one of the companies built to about 150 employees in the second year. And after I sold my last company, I retired. And for a few years, I didn't do any business work. Then I got a little bit bored, so I decided to get back into business activities. But my wife said, wait a minute, you promised me that when you sold your last company that you would retire, you would never work again. So we compromised. I said, how about I get back into business activities, but I will never ever work full time, and I will never ever run a product company will have lots of stress. How about I just do consulting? So she said, okay, fine, we'll have a deal. So I started an organization called Board of CEOs. It's a management consulting organization where CEOs pay a membership fee to attend the meetings. And in these meetings, we invite each and every active CEO to share a business issue. And then we basically have a good discussion about the subject, and we provide advice. And myself and my partners are all serial entrepreneurs, and we founded a number of companies. So we have a lot of first-hand experience to advise the CEOs. So over the course of 15 plus years, I have advised several hundred CEOs on startup and building a company and problems that those face. And in the process, I've helped some CEOs fire, replace some of the vice presidents. I've helped some companies sold their companies, and I've helped companies raise funding. But one of the most common assistance I provide was helping companies with their stock plan. Oftentimes, CEOs will come to the meeting and say, I'm in the process of trying to raise money from some angels or some VCs, and we have a big problem. The investors don't like the way our stock plan is put together. They think that some of the original founders have too many shares, and they don't think we have enough, to bring in some talented people. So in many cases, I've helped companies totally void every stock agreement in place and develop a brand new stock plan that was basically investor friendly. So I've helped companies with lots of issues, but the most common thing I help companies with is the executive staff and the stock plan. See, the most important criteria for investors to judge whether or not they invest in a company is the quality of the executive team. And oftentimes startups think that they have a strong team. A number of instances, the company founders were PhDs, There were several instances where there were three co-founders, all with PhDs in technology, and they have some pretty good technology, and they think they have a strong team. But they were really, really surprised when they talked to investors, and investors were not warm and said they didn't like the team. So when they talked to me, they said, well, gee, we have three co-founders, all PhDs. Why don't the investors like us? I said, because you don't have a strong team. And this is quite a shock to them. And so I explained to them, professional investors and myself, we have a definition for what makes a strong team. And a strong team should have three skill sets. One, the CEO should have strong management experience and leadership skills. Two, there should be a CTO with expertise in the company's core technology. And extremely important, there should be a sales executive who understands the market and has proven experience in bringing in paying customers. So three co-founders with PhDs in technology does not make a strong team because they might not necessarily have leadership skills, they might not necessarily have management skills, and they might necessarily, and usually they don't have sales and marketing skills.
So you're basically touching up on three pillars that you feel as if is very important to have a company that's actually going to be successful. So
Right.
And spreading out into those three pillars.
So basically, these are the three legs of a stool.
Right.
So if you only have, say, three PhD co-founders, it's like you have one leg.
Yeah.
Okay. You need to have the other skill sets to attract investors because investors do not invest in a technology; they invest in a business. And based on their experience, they think that companies that have good probability of success are companies that have those three skill sets. And oftentimes they said, as the business develops, there's going to be problems. But if you have a strong team, you can pivot and you can overcome problems. But if you have a weak team with super good technology, your chance of success is very low. Yeah.
So let me ask you then, Thomas, how would a startup, a founder go about assembling such a team? Because I mean, we're talking about
Let me address that.
Come again?
Let me address it and give you some example.
Okay.
So, so a startup approached me and says, we have this really neat idea or neat product, neat technology, and the three of us are all technical. So what I advise them is, it's okay to have three technical people to start a team, but what you need to do is to not have all three whole executive positions. So in one example, I would say, okay, one of you guys, the leader has some good management experience and good leadership skills. So that person should be the CEO. The second person is a very strong technologist, and so that person could be the CTO. But the third technical person should not be an executive. The third person should have a title of like senior engineer. And because the third person is not going to be executive, the third person should not also have substantial ownership. The reason that substantial ownership should not be given to a non-executive, but rather the substantial ownership should be reserved for a future sales and marketing executive. So if that is structured and not explained to the investors, then the investors will see that, hey, there's good plan for the company to succeed. But if the three founders, take a lot of ownership and leave very little equity to bring in a future sales and marketing executive, then investors would be very, very concerned and most likely would not invest. So it's okay to start with technical people, but bear in mind that it's extremely important to bring in an executive who has sales skills, who will be a major contributor, and there should be sufficient stocks to attract that kind of a talented person to join. So if the three co-founders, let's say, have 75% ownership, 75% ownership, that's not going to work. They need to be able to bring in a sales and marketing VP that have substantial ownership. Ownership probably close to what the CTO gets.
James O'Keefe is supposed to be there February 6th.
Oh, I want to go. When is that?
Tom Campbell,
Sorry
can you
about
mute
that,
yourself?
Thomas. For those who are on, please be sure that your screen is muted, just so we don't have any of those issues. Apologies, there, Thomas. You may continue, please.
Yes. So it's very important to have a good stock plan where there is sufficient equity reserved to bring in, talented people later on. So if the investors see that the co-founders have like 80% or more, they will not be interested in investing because they like to see sufficient ownership in the budget to bring in talented people later on. So another common mistake is that sometimes the founders will have most of their equity vested. This is a big negative for investors. And there's a very practical reason for that. Okay, let's say that the CEO has, say, 50% ownership, okay, and it's all vested. But a year or so later, maybe the CEO becomes sick or for whatever reason cannot perform the CEO function, and a new CEO needs to be brought in. Well, there isn't much ownership left to bring in a new CEO. But if the CEO, instead of having 50% all vested, of the 50% ownership, a portion is vested, and a large portion is to be vested over a period of 4 years. So then during the 4 years, if for some reason the CEO cannot perform that role, then the unvested shares will then be available to bring in his replacement. And that also goes true for the CTO, the sales and marketing.
So then, Thomas, how much equity should be reserved for the sales manager?
Well, typically what I recommend is that the founding team should not have more than 75%. And that founding team includes the three positions of the CEO, the CTO, and the sales marketing executive. So between those three, they should not own more than 75%. So, and if all three of those positions are not filled, they should definitely have a lot less than 75%. And also, unless the founding team have been working on a project for 4 or more years, their ownership should not be totally vested. Only a portion should be vested, and significant portions should be vested over 4 years. And if the plan is well thought out and it's what they call investor friendly, then that makes it so much easier to work with for investors. It's very painful for a startup to be told by the investors, we only invest on condition that every stock agreement has to be void and we have to put a new stock in place. Now, this is extremely painful because when you say to a co-founder, you have too many shares, we're going to have to redo the plan and you're going to have less shares. Well, it's always painful to take things away. It's better to have a good plan to begin with so that later on you don't have to go back and take shares away from the people. And the same true with investors. If investors are bought in early and given a lot of ownership, it makes it extremely difficult to bring in investors later on. Because the later investors will look at the original investors, wait a minute, the early investors have too much ownership. So we're not going to put in money and get very small ownership when the early investors put in small money and got big ownership. And so it's very important that startups get some experienced people to be the advisor. And advisors usually are not expensive for a startup. A lot of times advisors will advise startups for like, 0.5% ownership over a few years. So the help that they can get and the price they pay is extremely cost effective for startups. And the other thing is, sometimes startups think they have good advisors. Oftentimes, CEO would say, "Oh, we got these really good advisors because these advisors, we got a couple of advisors, nationally recognized people, and they have very high positions." And I says, "Wait a minute. If this guy is a national figure and he doesn't live anywhere near you, how much time does he really spend with you?" And the CEO would say, "Well, we got him for his name recognition." I says, "That's the wrong thing to do. You don't want an advisor for name recognition. You want an advisor who can give you help, who can give you hands-on help. Someone who's available. So someone who's famous, who's a big name person that you're just using for name, recognition, is totally worthless." And investors are very experienced, smart people, and they can see through that. So when they see that you have some high-level person on your as one of your advisors, they would dismiss this is worthless. This guy's not going to help you. He's too busy. So it's very important that when you do a startup, that you work with people who's been there, done that, has seen mistakes made, know how to do things the right way. So these are some of my opinions.
So then, okay, Thomas, I think that's awesome. But so now, outside of the founding team, and so we've already you've gone over percentages and the key pillars of what we're looking for in a founding team. So what would be next? So now you have the founding team intact. What are other things that a founder should consider having intact for this fundraising process?
Traction. Okay. So, another thing, common mistakes that startups make. Oftentimes, I would see a startup presentation with financial projections of 500 million revenue in year 5, 300 million profit in year 5. And I say to the CEO, "Why do you have such aggressive numbers?" Because there's no way that I believe that you can perform these numbers. And quite often, the entrepreneur will say, "Yes, most likely you're never going to be able to achieve those numbers, but we want to have these big numbers to attract investors." And I says, you did the exact opposite. By having these big, aggressive, ridiculous numbers, you turn off professional investors. And the reason is because professional investors are experienced business people. They know what is possible and what is not possible. When you project, I've seen several startups, 2 people company, pre-revenue. Yet they're projecting they're going to do 500 million in year 5. And the reason they project those numbers is that, well, this is the market size and we're going to get a certain percentage. I says, no, you're not. There's no way you're going to get a certain percentage. You need to do financial projections, not using the top down. So that the common inexperienced entrepreneurs use what I call the top down financial projection process. That is where they look at the market size and they say, we're going to do a certain percentage. It is a totally bad method. The method that I recommend, this is the method that professional investors like, is what I call the bottoms up projection. That's where you do your homework. You look at your products, how many units you're going to sell, the sales channel you're going to sell through, all the work that goes into it, and you project by month for the first couple of years and by quarter the later years. When you do that kind of detailed homework, you have much better chance of achieving your projections. And also, when investors are interested in investing in your company, they will say, let me see your financial projections. Let me see your detailed spreadsheet numbers. And if you don't have those, if you did the top down, you're not going to have those detailed numbers. And then when you don't have those numbers to back up your projections, then that means your projections are totally garbage.
Yeah. So Thomas, it seems startups take the top down approach versus the bottoms up because we're looking at it from the perspective of these investors are going to be so excited when they see this. This is exactly what they want to see, that we're going to make money. But you're saying that that's the wrong approach, and that may
Yes.
have an adverse effect on the whole thing versus just
Yes.
going the bottoms up, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, here's the thing. When entrepreneurs do a bottoms up projection, which is realistic, which requires a lot of homework, oftentimes the numbers will come up too modest. The numbers become too low to attract investors. So the entrepreneur says, I did what you told me to do, but then I got these low numbers. So then what should I do? Then I said, well, that's good. You did your homework and your numbers are too low. Now you got to go back and you got to look at your business and you got to figure out what can we do to make the numbers bigger. Do we develop more products? Do we develop more features? Do we try to pursue additional sales channels? Do we try to look at different ways of making revenue instead of just selling products? Can we license technology? Can we do partnerships? So if one goes through all the exercise of doing things the right way, of generating numbers that are meaningful, then you have a lot better chance of attracting investors.
Okay, so I love that, Thomas. And first thing, when I hear advices that they're kind of challenging, I'm like, okay, maybe this is right, because this is different from what I'm used to hearing, and it's really challenging and something that makes sense once you just broke down why you want to do a bottoms up approach. And I suppose some of the concerns for founders when it comes to bottom up is the fact that the numbers are looking poorly. But you're saying that because the numbers are looking poor, that gives a real opportunity to find the areas in which the numbers can improve and help the entire startup. And also that may entice investors to say, okay, we have something up our sleeves here, because these are more tangible and realistic versus just casting out this big number to try
Right.
to, okay, interesting. Sorry for cutting you off there. Let's continue. I like what.
I want to shed light on another issue. So sometimes the entrepreneur will say to me, I just saw this startup and they just raised 10 million or 20 million and they don't have anything. They don't have a prototype. And I says, yes, but you have to look at the person who raised the money. Now, here's the thing that they don't understand. If a startup raises significant amount of money without really having any traction, it is because the founder had previously founded a company and made a lot of profit for the investors. So just as an example, okay, a few years ago, my neighbor across the street decided that he wanted to do another startup. So he talked to the investors. His first round was $125 million. A year later, he did a second round, $80 million. He didn't have a prototype, but yet he was able to raise $125 million the first one. But there's a reason for it, okay? He was a principal founder of a company that Cisco bought for $6.5 billion. Okay, so his company generated many hundreds of millions of dollars of profit for the investors. So because of his track record, when he decided to start a new company, the investors gladly wrote him checks. And this example is repeated many times. So if you're an entrepreneur and you start in a company for the first time, you cannot expect this kind of courtesy from investors. Because if you have never founded a company and you have never made profits for investors, you're unproven. So therefore, you need to do your homework. Whereas people who are serial entrepreneurs, who have founded companies, who have already made substantial profits for investors, when they start a company later on, they don't have to do the same things because they already have their track record. And oftentimes investors will invest substantial amount. Now sometimes this doesn't work out for the investors. Sometimes the investors lose their money investing in an entrepreneur who was successful in an early company but becomes a total failure in a later stage. But still, because the entrepreneur has a proven record, then the confidence is there. So if you're an entrepreneur starting your first company, do not think that you're going to get things easy. You're going to have to do things the hard way. You're going to have to do it the right way, and you're going to have to do it the slow way.
Yeah, Thomas.
Not going to.
And even from the GP's perspective, if you were to deploy a large sum of capital into a founder that has already done it before versus a founder who's new to the game and it doesn't work out, you won't be looked at in such a light that's harsh if the founder has done it before than versus a new one, right?
Right.
There's that track record. So it all really makes sense. You're saying pay your dues. So the process, then it looks like it gets more simple the more we go through it. You know, if you're a second-time founder, third-time founder versus a first time. So right now in this game, it's really about paying your dues and doing it in a way that makes the most sense. So now, how much deeper does this bottoms up approach goes? What are some intricate details that should be paid attention to for a founder that's never used this approach?
Right. So anyway, I give people advice to use common sense. Okay. So there were a number of examples. I've seen some startups that project profits that were just absolutely too aggressive. So recently I talked to a founder, and he's an experienced entrepreneur. He's not a newcomer, but unfortunately, his accomplishment was in investment banking. Okay, so his success in investment banking doesn't necessarily work into his new venture, because his new venture is a hardware product company. Okay, and he projects profit margins that he was used to based on his investment banking experience, which is totally not useful for a hardware product company. So I asked the guy, I says, by the way, I says, you're familiar with a company called Apple, right? He said, yes. I said, well, would you agree that Apple is considered one of the most profitable hardware companies ever? He said, yes. I says, and your startup is a hardware product company, and you were projecting profit margins much higher than Apple. I said, do you really think that's realistic? Do you really think that any professional investor is going to believe that you can generate profit margins higher than Apple? And then he was rather embarrassed. He said, well, I guess I should go back and look at my numbers. The problem is that sometimes one has success in one field, but that doesn't necessarily apply to another field. So a guy who's been successful as a investment banker needs to understand that if he tries to build a hardware product company, the metrics are totally different. You know, and the other thing is, I've seen some product companies that project huge profits because they project very, very little expense. You know, I've seen a hardware product company where they show, a certain operating expense, and as the revenue goes up, like this, the expenses is like this. And I said, are you sure? Have you really looked at your numbers? The problem is that inexperienced people do not understand that you can generate huge revenues with very little operating expense. Because as your revenue grows, you need all kind of expenses. You need support. And so what I advise people is, when you project your finances, look at some companies that are in similar space. Look at companies that have similar products as your company, and look at their expenses, and look at their profit margins. And if you look at, companies like Apple and Cisco, okay, you should not project profit margins that are much higher than them, because it isn't going to happen. And also, when you look at companies like Apple, Facebook, Google, and you see the financial growth, and you're projecting financial growth that outperforms them, the chances are you're not going to come anywhere near close, and investors are not going to believe you. So you need to be realistic. And the other thing is, do not try to raise funding before your time. When you talk to professional investors, have some accomplishments, have some tractions. Now, people think that traction is sales, and that's good. If you have sales, that's good traction. But what if you're pre-revenue? How can you show tractions? Well, there are ways to show tractions to interest investors. Tractions like what they call MOU, Memorandum of Understanding. Now, the term used to be called LOI, Letter of Intent. The two are basically the same. Letter of Intent or Memorandum of Understanding, they both accomplish the same purpose. What they are agreements between you and some other company who sign an agreement saying they're interested in your technology, your product, your service, and they may be a paying customer later on. It's not a legal binding document. The other party does not commit legally to spend money to buy your products or licensing on it, but it does show that they're interested and they're willing to spend some effort to have their people work with your people to pursue a possible business partnership where they may become a customer. So if you're developing a technology and you find a few companies that are potentially interested in becoming your customers, and you have some prototypes for them to, say, play around with, and you get them to sign these MOUs, these are a type of traction that investors find interesting. But if you have nothing, if you just say to the investors, I got this great plan and I'm projecting all this revenue and profits, but you haven't really done anything to demonstrate that you're going to have some probability of success. But if you have a number of signed MOUs, especially if they're signed by reputable companies that are companies that their names are recognized by the investors, that goes to show that you have been working, on developing your technology, your products, and the companies that are potentially interested in becoming customers. That helps to get investors' interest.
So Thomas, it looks like you're saying basically, if we were to summarize it, you're either going to have profit or you're going to have users, whether it is the MOUs from major corporations, or it's just, if it's a B2C, you just have a bunch of consumers that are testing your app or whatever it may be.
Right.
So some traction, it doesn't have to be
Exactly.
cash, but it could just be who's using it, how many people are using it
Right.
outside of your family and friends, right? So
Yeah. For instance, you could have a number of users who are not paying. Okay. But the fact that you have a large number of users who are not paying but potentially could become paying customers is an indication that you have made some accomplishments.
right. Now, let me ask you something then, Thomas, and this is on the basis of the whole bottom up thing again. I just thought that was so unique, and I want to, I'm sure there are more questions that could be asked, but what I want to ask about that in relations to just numbers would be kind of around the conversation of KPIs. So which key performance should we be looking at in terms of numbers that we should really focus on in the startup stage while we're getting traction, users, and what have you? What numbers have you found to be very important typically to look at? I know it could be different based on the industry or whatever product or service you're offering, but what are some typical numbers to really pay attention to as a startup looking to raise equity?
Well, for instance, if you have like half a dozen MOUs, or you have half a dozen beta, companies testing your products, these would be good numbers to present to investors. The thing is that a lot of entrepreneurs, pitch to investors when they basically do not have any traction. They do not have any accomplishments that demonstrate that they're a good bet, to succeed. So when a startup says, I have this great vision, and we're going to generate all these revenues and we generate all this profit. But investors, but what have you really done? What have you really accomplished? How do I know that anything you say is going to happen? But if you say, well, I have, 100,000 users, or I have 6 companies that have signed MOUs that are currently, testing our prototype. I have 5 or 6 beta, companies. You need to show that you have made some achievements that give people a good feeling that, hey, there's a good likelihood that what you're doing is good, and the people are interested, and people believe in it, and people are working with you. And of course, it's really good when people start paying you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Now, if we were to go into now that we're talking about numbers, and I've seen a question come in about valuations. So I'm wondering,
Okay,
Thomas.
this is another thing. Okay,
Uh-huh.
okay, this is a very, very important point, valuation. So sometimes, entrepreneurs turn off investors by placing too high a valuation. They say, oh, we think our company is worth 10 million. And the investors, no way. Your company shouldn't be worth more than 5 million. Well, there's also another mistake. Some entrepreneurs make the mistake of bringing in investors early on by selling shares at a very low price, which is also means a low valuation. So I was advised to a company where the CEO, who was inexperienced, it was the first startup, sold shares of the company, but that basically gave the company like about a 1.5 million valuation. Well, this is extremely bad, because if the early investors bought stocks at a valuation of $1.5 million, and a year later they're trying to raise $1 million with a valuation of like 5 or 6 million, it's going to be a big problem, because the new investors said, wait a minute, you want me to invest to the company with a 5 million valuation when just a year ago the investors put in the money at a 1.5 million valuation? So what happened in that particular case, as advisor to that startup, I had to work with the CEO, and we had to cancel every stock agreement that was in place. All the founders' stock plan was voided. The investors' stock purchase was voided. And I had to negotiate with the early investors to have them get fewer shares. So basically, the money they put in, I had to negotiate them to get less ownership than they originally got. And I was able to convince the investors by saying, if you don't agree, the company is going to fold, because no investor will come in and put money in when you put your money in at such a low valuation. So the only way the company could get future funding is for you to accept a lower ownership for the money that you put in a year ago. Now, this was extremely painful to the investors, and also it was very painful for the co-founders to be told by me, an advisor, that they have too much ownership, that they have to also give up some ownership.
So then, Thomas, when we're looking at,
yeah, let me finish that point. Okay.
okay.
So my advice is, do not have valuation in your company at early stage. Do not sell stocks when the company is young. You know, a lot of investors insist on getting stocks, and this is what happened. Okay, inexperienced entrepreneurs say, well, I needed to raise money, and the early investors said the only way they could put in money is if they get shares. And I says, no, then you need to find other investors. So companies that are young, that are like 1 or 2 years old, they should not have any kind of valuation. They should raise money, okay, with convertible notes, or what they call SAFE, okay. That is where the investors put in the money as a debt to be converted to equity at a future date. So when your company is a few months old, a year old, and you don't have any, substantial achievement, you're not going to get a good valuation. But if you set a low valuation like 1 or 1.5 million, you're going to ruin your chance of getting investors later on. So companies that are young, that don't have substantial achievement, do not have a valuation. Use convertible note, where the investors put in the money as a debt to be converted to equity at a future date, with a discount. Okay. And never ever raise money early stage by selling stocks. And also, never ever sell common stocks to investors. Investors in early stage should never ever get stocks. They should do the convertible note, method. And when they do get stocks, the stocks should be preferred. And startups have two types of stocks: preferred and common. And typically, the prefers might be valued like 100 times higher than common. And there's a legal loophole with the liquidation preference. So these are all things that entrepreneurs need to understand. So I really, really encourage all startups, get some experienced advisor to help with the company. And I mean an advisor, not someone who's a national figure, but an advisor who has had experience starting up companies and been through, this process, and can give advice based on first-hand experience.
Okay, Thomas. So I know you're busy, but I see a question here that I think we should ask it as we're winding down here. Why preferred instead of common stocks?
Okay, your preferred stock is at a much higher price. Okay, so for instance, if a company is worth $5 million, okay, then the price per share might be like $1 a share. But the common stock for the employees, the founders, may be a tenth of a penny per share. Okay, because you don't want to give a stock plan to an employees and say you got to pay $1 a share. So if a co-founder has 1 million shares, you don't want the have the co-founder put up $1 million to buy his 1 million shares. So the co-founder might pay 1/10 of 1 penny per share, but the investors might buy the preferred stocks at $1 a share. And legally, this is acceptable and is commonly practiced. And the legal justification for the differential in price is the liquidation preference given to the preferred shareholders and not to the common shareholders. But however, in most practical cases of a high-tech startup going under, typically the company has no value, no assets. So the liquidation preference is really not very meaningful in real practice, but it's just a legal, parameter to enable the difference between the prices of the two shares. So preferred stock should always be used for investors, and common stock should always be used for employees. And there should be a huge price differential between the two shares.
Man, okay, that's awesome, Thomas. So I know we're getting close on time here. Are there any questions from the community that you'd like me to ask Thomas here while we still have about 8 minutes?
Quick question here. How can we reach out to Tom? So we are actually, having a startup. We want to get some of his advice.
Okay. The best way to get started is to join Startup Mentors membership. Okay. So the website is called startup-mentors.com. And you can join the annual membership for $100 by using the discount code SUS, which is abbreviation for ScaleupStream. So SUS will give you a 20% discount, and you can join the membership for $100. And having this 1-year membership, you will have access to a substantial amount of startup advice contributed by 20 business mentors, and I am among the 20. And the other 19 mentors and myself have contributed a total of 60 sets of advice for startups. Okay, and then if after you join the membership and you look at you read the advice that are on the website, and you want additional help, the 20 mentors business profile and contact information is also on the website. And then you can contact either myself or any one of the other 19 mentors by sending to their email or contact that's on the website. So that's the first thing you can do, is to join the Startup Mentors membership using SUS discount code. Okay?
Sounds good. Thank
What
you.
is that discount code?
SUS. The discount code is SUS. Also, I see questions here pertaining to whether there's going to be, what was it, a transcript of this here recording? Yes. So this is going to be on YouTube, and so you can expect to see this on YouTube tomorrow. and the YouTube does a great job at turning everything into a transcript. So you'll be able to catch a playback of this here tomorrow on YouTube. Now, let's see here. Any other questions? Please type your questions in here just so we don't, just for the recordings. I know like the screen switches when somebody else is talk. So if you have a question, please type it in here. And I can ask Thomas real quick before we get off.
I typed one, but you didn't ask me.
Oh, you okay. What Thomas' view on safe agreements? All right, so I guess this is the last question here, just to the time. So Thomas, a question here for you would be on safe agreements. What's your perspective on safe agreements?
I think it's a good vehicle for early stage investment. The difference between a safe and a convertible note is that the safe doesn't have a expiration date. Typically, in a convertible note, there's a term where the note expires. So a safe is a better vehicle to use for early stage investment.
Awesome. All right. So Thomas, honestly, it's been such a pleasure having you join us here in our community. I know there's been a ton of value in this conversation. Hopefully we can have another conversation surrounding this, because there's so much more. And I know you wanted to go deeper, but the time. So I would love to, have you back. And I'm sure everyone here would agree with that. We really appreciate you for joining us here today, and everyone else that came on to join us as well. Thomas, thank you so much.
You're welcome. And also, because I personally founded 4 companies, and I personally advised several hundred CEOs, I have lots of different subjects I can share with entrepreneurs. And so in future sessions like this, we can cover other subjects. Like one of my favorite subjects is where the principal founder should not be the CEO. And I think
that's a good one. I think that's a good one. I wish we could have that right now.
We can do that next time.
Okay, let's set that up and then have you back on our next investor discussions and tips. So, again, Thomas, thank you so much for joining us. Looking forward to having you back. And thank you everyone for tapping into this conversation as well.
And to all you people out there, I've enjoyed this session, and I hope that some of my words, can be helpful to your startup. And I'm also look forward to helping some of you who will reach out to contact me, because there are a lot of things I can help so that you will not make some of the mistakes that other entrepreneurs make.
Amen. Thank you, Thomas. You guys have a good one.
Right. Thank you. Bye, everyone.